Black Lives Matter. 200 years ago, enslaved abolitionists spoke. A white woman listened. And in backlash, Britain waged its first war on white woke. Britain's first Black Lives Matter moment was October 1823, perhaps Britain's first Black History Month. That month, the Foreign Secretary, George Canning, wrote to his fellow ameliorationist, William Wilberforce, that, quote, the cry was for immediate and unqualified freedom, unquote. In the final months of 1823 and the first months of 1824, this cry of insurrectionists on plantations in the country we now know as Guyana was published in newspapers here in Britain. To this black cry, reported to her by those newspapers, a Quaker widow, racialized as white, in the East Midlands city of Leicester, listened. Her ear was ever open to the cry of distress, wrote an early biographer of Elizabeth Heyrick. Although the distress to which Heyrick responded was not an instantaneous transatlantic transmission of a 9-minute and 29-second long video, Heyrick nevertheless responded, when it arrived, to the news of extrajudicial killings of people racialized as black in the Americas, specifically in the British Caribbean colony of Demerara. Although it took 6 years from the publication of her game-changing anti-slavery pamphlet in spring-summer 1824, the fact that Heyrick listened to, learned from, and relayed the black cry for immediate and unqualified freedom enabled Britain's first Black Lives Matter movement in 1830 to begin. Heyrick was not the only person to publish a pamphlet in spring-summer 1824. Robert Wedderburn, a Jamaican preacher, racialized as mixed, living in Britain, published his book, The Horrors of Slavery. It had started out, in the beginning of that year, as letters to the editor of a newspaper in response to an article reporting on a meeting of enslavers, an article entitled The Blessings of Slavery. Wedderburn had used these letters to name the white British enslaver who had raped his mother of African descent and to claim his rightful place as a brother of the enslaver's white children. The newspaper ran with the headline, Brother or no brother? That is the question. Just as Heyrick had listened to the enslaved who had risen up in Demerara, Heyrick listened to the Jamaican who had risen up here in Britain. Heyrick's pamphlet was so popular that by the end of 1824 it had been republished 3 times. In the 3rd edition, she added on the front cover an illustration. Heyrick's choice of illustration was a potentially game-changing gambit. Heyrick chose to undo 1807. Heyrick chose to undo the mythology surrounding the anti-slave trade movement that lasted from 1787 to 1807. Heyrick chose to undo the illustration invented in 1787 by Josiah Wedgwood, one of Birmingham's great white men of the Industrial Revolution, or as we Brummies call them, Golden Boys. The Wedgwood medallion consisted in a motif and a motto. Take the motif. Kneeling, looking up importuning with clasped hands either God or the white man, or because they are one and the same both, is a person racialized, aged, and gendered as a black adult man. Now take the motto. It is a question. Am I not a man and a brother? Wedgwood medallions were like hotcakes. The taste for wearing them became general, Thomas Clarkson tells us, and thus a fashion. However, in 1817, in his newspaper titled The Axe Laid to the Root, or A Fatal Blow to Oppressors, being an address to the planters and Negroes of the island of Jamaica, Robert Wedderburn warned the British working class as follows: "But do not petition, for it is degrading to human nature to petition your oppressors." Heyrick would have agreed with Wedderburn. Furthermore, Professor Marcus Wood urges us to analyze in detail Heyrick's choice of illustration. And I quote, "The tremendous sentence, 'I am a man, your brother,' in one daring move decimates the interrogative double negative of the original slogan. By substituting your brother for a brother, this powerful phrase enforces intimacy between black and white. It is most significant that it was a radical female consciousness that finally swept away the sinister shroud of negativity in which the statement of black equality had been so comfortably shrouded for 3 decades. In this context, the words were as important as the image, and it is consequently worth dwelling on the precise terms of a formula that so perfectly encapsulated the conditions under which black freedom was allowed to ask for its right to be. In any context, there is a vast amount at stake in the simple inversion of the two words I and am. I am proclaims its vitality. Am I asks to be assured that it is alive. The slave is asking what is for the white audience a real question, and one that influential white intellectuals in Britain were still answering in the negative in the mid-19th century. Essentially, what Heyrick did with her choice of illustration was to reject a movement based on a hesitant question, do Black Lives Matter? And open up in Britain the possibility of a movement grounded in a confident assertion. Black Lives Matter. In December 1824, Heyrick asked, why did England sleep for ages till an abolitionist awakened her? Why has she slept since the abolition of the slave trade, so gloriously won, but alas, now so ineffectual? Will she now, again, lulled by her own prosperity and stupefied by her own luxuries, sleep? The opposite of getting woke is ensuring society stays slept. And Heyrick's message to us is to wake up, to get up, to stand up, stop begging for our freedom, stop applying for their grants, start asserting liberation, start claiming reparation. But don't get me wrong, both illustrations are deeply problematic, deeply patriarchal. When we visit the Library of Birmingham, we will see and have an opportunity to reflect critically upon the counterpart illustrations gendered as female, produced by the Birmingham Female Society for the Relief of British Negro Slaves. With this in mind, similarly, my message to you is to wake up. Get up. Yes, you. Please stand up. Stand up. And turn to the person next to you. Look them in the eye and say the following words. I am a human. your sibling. Just as, in 1824, Heyrick began the process of undoing 1807 and preparing for what turned out to be 1838. We today, in 2024, must rise up to the standard Heyrick set us and begin the process of undoing 2007 and preparing for 2038.